Canada comes to MJ Biz. Lucas, thanks for making time.
Jay, always a pleasure. Lovely to be at the Cannabis Super Bowl.
The Cannabis Super Bowl. It is the Cannabis Super Bowl.
It's my first time between two ferns, I got to say. I'm very happy to be
It's
here.
really in front of one. That's how we're, I guess we actually, these are boxwoods actually. Lucas, you are a long-time member of the cannabis industry, regulatory and scientific expert. Has this show, I'll recall a story. Last 2 times ago, maybe, we were here?
Last
3
one,
times ago?
2019 was my last
I saw you
venture.
right at the beginning of the show. You had just come from a couple of sessions, and you said
Information sessions, just
Yes.
to be clear.
Right, of course. Right, that's fair. Information sessions, and you were saying that to you the scientific conversations weren't as advanced as you thought they should be. Do you remember this?
I'm very much a recovering academic and have very high standards for what I like to see in these kinds of productions.
Has that changed, do you think?
No, I'm still very vocal. I'm still very hard to work with.
I didn't mean that. I meant the content that happens at these shows. Do you think the general scientific knowledge or focus on it has stepped up or no?
I think we've said everything we have to say about it. I mean, we've done a lot of these shows, and there's not too much science coming in now. It's just watching these new markets emerge. From a regulatory perspective, it's really fun to sit back on the sidelines and watch how certain things can happen and other things can't. Speaking about, for example, the deregulation or regulation, I guess, of Delta 8 recently, it just blows my mind as a chemist how you can have 2 THC molecules, but you change one double bond, and all of a sudden,
And now it's not regulated.
One's okay, and one's people are in jail for it.
Right.
Last Prisoner Project. Look it
Yeah.
up.
We don't have to. You could just look up while you're here because we're sharing a booth with them, and it's been enlightening to sort of hear the stories, talk to their constituents as well, because that's obviously a big part of why obviously we're partnered with them.
Just flipping through the book, it's very moving and invokes emotion that people
Yes.
are getting 40, 60 lifetime sentences
Yes,
for
and
cannabis.
they're still in jail.
And they're still in jail.
And that's why people are taking action today, and all the time as well. Their work is super important and critical. And as you think about the new markets that are coming online, and we've had this conversation, geez, I feel like a month ago, sitting not in Las Vegas but in Toronto. I think it's Monday. If we're sitting here on the 15th of November.
I think we're Wednesday.
Wednesday, but then next week at some point in New York, I think there's definitely a hearing, new regulations being identified.
Some card licenses hopefully being handed out too is what the expectation is.
And everything from the state says they're going to actually start opening some stores by the end of the year. That seems very aggressive given where they are now, no?
I think we'll see a lot of cooperatives get licensed first, the nonprofits.
Yeah.
Folks offering vocational services to those that are incarcerated or previously incarcerated. That'll probably be the first round, which is great, and that's very important. I know the state is very eager to see movement and progress. I don't know if you've walked through Manhattan lately, but every smoke shop, every corner, every trucks, vans, everyone is on board now, and now doors are starting to get kicked in.
Yeah.
The NYPD is starting to get a little more fed up.
Yeah. And it is this, and that was true a year ago, right? As soon as you decriminalize, people's risk tolerance goes way up because there's very little risk.
Shroomies in Toronto is a great example of that, right?
Interesting, because I feel like there was a raid at Shroomies a couple days ago.
Yeah, there was.
While
just
we were on
last
the way
week.
here.
I was on the CBC, which is Canadian Broadcasting Company. They have a French version, Radio Canada.
Wait.
And I'm one of the few French speakers in the cannabis sector that get called upon
Right, let's see. It's a pretty good monopoly.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I don't know how many people listen to radio at 6 a.m. that are interested in cannabis.
And speaking French.
Speaking French. But they were very interested to know where that sits, having these illegal dispensaries pop up. And a lot of the movement, I think, is really just out of protest. People are upset that these things aren't available. They feel that they're life-changing, and they're not wrong. There's certainly a lot of evidence to suggest that. But I can't really tip my hat to the fact that they're opening up potentially, not potentially, 100% illegal stores and selling unregulated product.
On Queen West in Toronto.
Yeah, that's right.
But Vancouver is even more dialed in. I mean, there was just a story about like a full psychedelic shop.
Even more abhorrent and in your face is what's happening in Vancouver.
Which is true with cannabis as well.
Still happening in cannabis too. There's a few shops on Bloor that are still waiting for their AGCO license.
Right. But again, the risk level. But thinking about that, and are there lessons that, because we often talk about sort of what we've learned in Canada, what could be applicable to other places. Is that one of the things that you like? You can't have the regulations be so burdensome that people don't want to make the transition to the legal market.
Yeah, that's one of the gaps that we're seeing in New York is that they haven't thought about how legacy people are going to transition over.
Right.
So the growers there don't have a means to be able to really get involved in the industry the same way that you would be able to if you're in the retail dispensary space.
Right.
But that information, that intellectual property that's been accumulating there illicitly, legacy wise, in New York doesn't have a means of sort of being channeled into it. Canada's done an okay job. They have this 10-2 declaration, which Health Canada closes their eyes for a couple minutes and they say, okay, whatever plants you have, when I count to 3 with my eyes, that's what you get.
Transition. So just because I don't think I understood this one well. When you become a grower, like a licensed producer,
That's right.
is it like a one-time?
One time per building.
Oh,
Per building. So you could just start a franchise and bring in more illicit product each time.
rewind that a bit, because you were obviously following this as things were becoming legal. Otherwise, you're really limited to like some pretty specific strains that the government has sanctioned.
That's right.
That people don't want necessarily.
No, and they were horrible things that were being purchased initially from Europe.
Is Shishkaberry one of them?
It was the products that the LPs in Europe didn't want. They were selling to LPs in Canada to fuel the medical framework
Right.
here.
And that's both the patients were getting it, and that was not great. But then as the market opened up to legal, they weren't the strains that people who buy the most cannabis wanted.
That's right.
Is that fair?
Yeah, there are a lot of very, let's call them purists, that really like certain cultivars, we'll call them, of the cannabis plant and want to see, they work for them. They I guess, do the thing that they do.
Right.
And people are very specific about that. So having that sort of translational process is very important. We don't have that in New York yet, but it's still early.
Right.
And the guidance document has come out recently. There's still a lot of gaps there. I don't know if you've had a time or a moment to flip through it, but they're asking
Do
some
you
very.
think I have, Lucas? There are people here that have. I'm not one of them, but I look to you and the folks here to say.
Well, I've done it so you don't have to.
There you go.
And there are a few gaps.
Carl
I mean,
Lucas.
they want these retail dispensary owners to have basically a generator. And again, going back to walking through the streets of Manhattan.
So they don't go down, so the data's not lost over a period of
visual
minutes?
surveillance, physical security systems. They got to be powered for 8 hours in the event of an outage.
It's a long haul.
It is. When was the last time you saw an 8-hour power outage in Manhattan?
There was one, but it was, I want to say, like almost 20 years ago.
Okay.
But,
Yeah,
that was just the whole East Coast. It had nothing to do with Manhattan.
There you have it. So.
But nothing could stay open anyway. There's no electricity. Right? There was. So 8 hour, no gap in electricity.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's a little bit unreasonable, and some of the zoning things, really sort of limit where folks can operate. If we find out that Equinox is owned, by the Jewish community, then they could really own all of Manhattan when sort of make it not operable in terms of where people could set up. YMCA would be another example, right? Those are considered houses of worship.
Right. I understand.
So anyone that owns a place of wellness, that's,
And I want to sort of blow that out a little bit, because I think we're also seeing things like this take place in New Jersey, right next door, where half the cities in either of those states have said no to cannabis.
That's right.
Further, there are restrictive zoning regulations to then create these like pockets where it is okay, but the pockets are few and far between, even in the communities that have said yes, which puts enormous pressure on the real estate.
100%.
And that's where I think in New Jersey right now, there are people with conditional licenses that may never get to the annual licenses because they can't find the real estate.
The cities have all the control in New Jersey. Right. If you are not in their favor, it's really too bad. That's going to be challenging to see how that plays out. New York's different though. The OCM is really sticking to the man, and they really want these stores open, and I think that's fantastic.
And I guess that's actually one of the things, like a watch out for net new operators or people going to business, is that lease, right? Talking about real estate, like you've seen it, I've seen it. We've seen it in Toronto play out in both ways, where there's tons of stores and then they start to dial back, because that first lease can be make or break it for a business.
Absolutely, yeah. 90% of the decisions you make happen in the first sort of, first couple of months of you setting up shop, those have the biggest impacts on your business.
The sunk cost forever.
For sustainability. You were to see a lot of those aggressive lease agreements where they're paying 2x, 3x, or 10x the dollars per square foot, and people are forgetting to ask for things like what's exit clauses, right? How do you get out of something if you now all of a sudden can't open up?
Right.
In New Jersey, because
right. If you can't get a license.
Yeah, that's it's very, very tough, and we're seeing the ramifications of that in mature markets like in Queen West,
Yes.
Toronto.
Yeah,
a lot of places are changing hands, changing ownership, or they're giving up altogether.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to see. It's hard to see from just like a cityscape perspective, because while there were complaints that there were a lot of cannabis stores, I think there's more complaints that there are now empty storefronts.
Right.
And like the pendulum just swings back and forth. And I guess at some point does the pendulum stop to some steady state? And I hope so, and I think so. It takes a long time.
Cannabis was driving the real estate economy in Toronto all throughout COVID.
Yeah.
As restaurants were shutting down, shops were coming in.
Yeah. The timing of like COVID and the ramp up of retail. I mean, I think it was right before COVID. We probably had you on. We were Business of Cannabis talking about the number of licenses they were going to approve. Remember, it was like 20 a month, and then it was like, oh my goodness, 20 a week, and then it was like unlimited.
Yeah.
And that all happened within the span of like 3 months, and that was the 3 months leading into COVID.
That's right.
Something like that.
That's right. And it's interesting. We're actually seeing a spike of people starting retail stores in Ontario now. It's been a big uptick.
In outskirts or rural or same types of places.
I've got a couple of clients within the last month who want to do downtown Toronto. But hang on a sec here. I am in the business of helping people start new businesses.
Right, I understand.
There is a second, third mover advantage now to coming in, picking up some of this infrastructure that's been developed, curated, a staff, inventory ready to go.
Yeah.
Or seeing what others have done and not making those same mistakes. So there's
no, I believe that.
Value.
There's probably the same thing on the producer side or the product side, or
yeah.
No, it's very compelling and
it's a very wasteful business, though. I mean, these cultivation facilities, you really can't use them for anything else once they go on the market.
Yeah, what would you transit?
Food, pharma.
But even those, they're way too pharma maybe, but food, like they're way too overbuilt for like regular tomatoes, right? Unless you're growing the kindest of kind tomatoes.
Yeah, well, I mean, very similar species. We have converted a couple of those tomato grows into cannabis. We could convert them back, absolutely.
Easy.
Yeah.
Fewer restrictions.
Very clean.
Well, Lucas, I learn something every time we talk, and
me too.
And I do like. I love being able to sort of chat on a regular basis about what's happening in New York, because I think it's right close to where we are, but also I think there's a lot of lessons that they're trying to incorporate in what they're doing, which it's always good to see new states iterate on what's been done before and learn from lessons gone by.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I like, you can bring your kid in the store so they don't have to wait in the car.
Yeah, now my kid's constantly in the car. No, just kidding. Well, that's the thing in Toronto. There's so many stores. Like you could say, just walk one block without me and I'll catch up. But yeah, I mean, in Toronto, it doesn't make any sense because you can go to a liquor store too. Like it's all...
They can hold a bottle for you while you're getting your purse or your wallet.
And they can serve alcohol. They can give tastings in the actual liquor stores. So,
well, hey, I would argue you could do that in a retail store too.
Right. Beverages.
Cannabis research licenses, get your lounge.
Oh,
going.
If you want to see a full rundown of it, visit businessofcannabis.com for a webinar. I'm just kidding. Lucas, thanks so much for stopping by. We'll connect with you throughout the next couple of days while we're here.
Jay, it's a pleasure to be in some warm weather.
Yeah. It's actually not even that warm. That's the funny thing. Although it was awful in Toronto yesterday.
Yeah.